Hey there. Good morning from where I am. Good afternoon or good evening to wherever you are. For today, I'm talking about some mistakes that especially new designers, but sometimes all designers will make when setting type, and kind of some things to be aware of as you're looking over a design that you're working on, kind of trying to figure out why isn't this working or what's not right here. The first one that I want to talk about is using too many typefaces, right? So a lot of design, I think, is actually just knowing what you don't need, right? Being able to look at something with a very critical eye and then filter out the things that aren't actually furthering the purpose. In fact, if I could have you guys take any one thing away from the stream in general, it would be that less is more when it comes to design. And you should build the habit of trying to look at every design with a very critical eye and thinking about what you can take away rather than what you can add. What's the least amount of things that you can put on the page that will effectively communicate the message that you're trying to share, because often that's actually going to be the better design than something that has a lot of different elements that might be redundant or might be distracting. It's much easier to add too much and go astray that way. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to type. If you are really looking to be very minimalist and keep things very simple, you really only need one typeface, right, for any single design, especially if you've chosen a really well-rounded typeface with lots of different font weights and style options, and we talked about that a lot last week, this idea of technically assessing a typeface the same way that you might technically assess a JavaScript library or anything else that you might add to your application, kind of making sure that you've thought through what this typeface is going to need to do for you both now and in the future, making sure that you've chosen something that will kind of grow with you. And I think that's especially true when we're looking at things like this, right? Because if you have one typeface that has a whole bunch of weights or is variable weight, has good italics, has good bolds, maybe has a really good thin version, then you can create the kind of contrast and visual interest that you want in your design without having to choose multiple typefaces and even really deal with that question of do these all look good together? Which is something that I think especially beginners can really kind of struggle with, right? It can be nice to have 2 or 3 typefaces so that you have some more tools for kind of creating that contrast or visual interest, but you can totally do it with one, right? I think of it really similarly to color schemes, to creating color palettes. You can do a lot with a single color, right? You can make a monochrome color palette that can be really visually interesting and can be really effective, right? Facebook is the poster child for that. Everything that they do is blue and it looks fine, right? Setting aside everything that Facebook does and is, if we're just talking about their design's really good, right? It's really clean. And I think you can do the same thing if you choose one typeface that gives you all of the options you need to create different weights and styles and create your hierarchy. Yep. So I would say especially the thing to take away is to not get carried away. You definitely don't need more than 2 or 3. If you're into the realm where you're importing 5 or 6 different fonts, that might be a little red flag. It's kind of not there's code smells. That might be a design smell, for you to take a moment and go, do I really need this? Can I replace some of these? What is each one of these individual typefaces bringing to my design? And do I need another typeface in order to do that? Or can I accomplish that same goal with some of the elements that I already have? Another thing that I want to talk about, which is almost borderline grammar. This is the thing with typesetting is that it's also a little bit about colors, and it's also a little bit about grammar, and it's also a little bit about all this other stuff, because type is just intrinsically part of the world in a way that's hard to pull it apart and talk exclusively about type. But one of the most common kind of typesetting mistakes that I see on the web is how we use underlines, right? Hyperlinking has changed the context of underlines, such that when something is underlined on a screen now, it means something different to when something is underlined in a print document. Especially for those of us that are, my age or older, you might have been taught to use underlines in a different way when you were growing up, when you were in school, right? You were told underlines are maybe for emphasis or to designate titles of things like books, or plays or songs. That rule does not apply anymore when we're talking about digital stuff. I think anything that's going to appear on a screen that's interactive, those rules are kind of outdated now. On a screen, an underline should really only mean one thing, and that's a link. And there are other ways you can italicize, right, to designate titles, and you can italicize for emphasis sometimes. You can bold for emphasis. Like, you have other options to communicate the same ideas now without using an underline, but contextually now underlines have come to mean I can click on this and I'm going to go somewhere different. So I want to be careful that we're not using that visual language in a way that's misleading, right? Because it can be really confusing, or it can feel frustrating when you go to click on something, it's not really a link. So just something to keep in mind, right? And the flip side of that is that if something is a link, it should always have an underline. If you, it's happening less and less now. I feel like we've kind of come through that phase where we're designating links with like a background color or a different font color or something. But that was a mess. We didn't enjoy that. Less of that. If it's going to go somewhere as a link, it should have an underline, and it should not have an underline if it's not. The end. The other thing that I think is a common kind of mistake that's made is leading, right? Or line height, if we're talking about it from a CSS perspective. Because you will almost always need more leading, more line height than you think that you do. Generous leading is going to make your text significantly easier to read. It's going to improve the overall visual balance of your page by letting you sneak in some extra white space. You want to make sure that you're kind of finding that sweet spot, right? Because it's true, you can add too much leading as well. If like one line is here and the next one's not until here, that's difficult to read. You're going to negatively impact the like skimmability and readability of your page if your leading is like huge. But the same is true as if your leading is like nothing, right? And your text is all squished together and it feels really tight and uncomfortable and like just ugh. Try setting that line space, that line height, and then taking like a few steps back from your screen and seeing how that text looks. Does it feel really dense and tight? Does it feel like a solid object when you're looking at it? Because that's generally an indication that that's not really a great design choice. You want it to feel kind of light and airy, but still cohesive, right? You want to be able to look at it and see that text all goes together, but you don't want it to feel like heavy. And I'm trying to think of like the right way to put it, because I feel like I'm using the same words over and over. But let me know if you don't know what I mean. But I think you probably do, right? This idea that it should feel cohesive. You should understand that all of this text goes together. The leading should not be so big that it starts to feel separate. And yet, you don't want it to feel like, a solid block. Because that's hard to read. In general, I found that people err on the side of not adding enough leading rather than adding too much. So I think it's pretty safe to say, like, you want a little bit more leading than you think you do. And almost always you want a little bit more leading than the default will provide, right? So when you set your text, there's often, like, if you're using design software, automatic leading that will kind of accompany that. And I found that almost always I want to bump that up, like, just another point or two. And err slightly on the side of what you think is too much rather than on the side of not enough. Like, if you're going to pick a side to be wrong on the side of having a little bit too much. Kind of in line, with that is the idea of alignment. And alignment really matters. And in this case, I'm not talking about like chaotic good, lawful neutral. Who doesn't love a little D&D alignment joke? But in this case, no, I'm talking about your text alignment. Most of the time, you want your text to be aligned to match the reading direction of the text. So if you're setting left to right languages, you want a left alignment. If you're setting right to left languages, I think my screen is flipped. So if it looks like I'm gesturing in the wrong direction, I promise I know my right to my left. I'm scared. If you're doing right to left languages, you want a right alignment. When we use an alignment that matches the direction of the text, we make it significantly easier to read because our eyes already know where to go to start the next line, right? So when you think about it, right, you have like there's always one that makes a clean line, and then the other side of your text has a ragged edge. In fact, sometimes when we talk about alignment, you might hear it called like ragged right. And that has to do with the way that an alignment looks, right? I'm not sharing my screen because I feel like this little thing that I'm doing with my pen is probably not actually helping you that much. So give me a minute to open a new window, and then we'll take a look at some alignment. So you can see what I mean. Do that, share your screen. Okay, cool. So yeah, right, here's what we're talking about. Where's that example? I just wanted the image, really. Open image. Oh my god, it's so small. That's okay. This is what happens when we try to improv things. It never goes as well as we think. This is what I'm talking about, right? This idea of like the ragged right on a left align, or the ragged left on a right align. When we're doing this and we read in a text that is left to right, our eyes always know exactly where to come back to because the starting place is exactly the same all the way down the block of text. So we finish this line, we know this is exactly where we come back to. Whereas if we're talking about something that's center aligned or left to right text that's been right aligned, we don't always know where to come back to because this is not consistent. So our eyes have to kind of search every line to find like, oh, where did this one start? Oh, where does that one start? So every time we get to here, we have to come over here, and there's extra mental work that happens while our eyes try to find the starting point of the next line, which sometimes is over here, but sometimes it's over here, you know, and it's not great. And it's not something you think about because your brain is really good at this kind of stuff, at like hiding this kind of stuff, but it stacks up if you were to have to read like a whole bunch of text that was set this way, center aligned. It would feel exhausting after a while because that mental load would really start to kind of stack up for you the more you have to do it. Our brains really love patterns. We want things to be predictable. We want to be able to guess what will happen next. That's what makes things feel really intuitive in a design, right? When we talk about like opening up a page and like we know just what to do, and the design was so intuitive and it was easy and like no one had to teach me where to go. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about because when we are able to predict correctly like what will happen, it just makes the whole thing easier and we don't have to think, right? You probably heard of the famous UX book by that name, right? Like, don't make me think. It's really the goal of all design is like, don't make me think about it. Whatever we can do to lessen that friction and make sure things are right where we assume that they're going to be, that's true. And that's true in typesetting, and it's true everywhere. Blanket design rule. So when we're talking about alignments like this, center alignment is going to be best only for things like standalone headers or like really short blurbs of text or like pull quotes or things where we're talking like 3 or less lines, rule of thumb, you know, and that includes, by the way, how many lines it's going to look like on your mobile device, right? So that's not 3 lines of like big desktop text. That's even small. How many line breaks are we looking at here? Because that's what matters when it comes to alignment. Right align should really only be used, again, if you're talking about like right to left languages, or yes, or if you're talking about like just a few lines of text that butt up against something with a hard edge. So right, if this is like if there's a photo right over here and you've got like 2 lines of right aligned text, that's probably fine, you know? In general though, the rule of thumb, center aligned for headers only, left aligned and right aligned to match the reading direction of the text. And just don't use justified, right? I don't think that was it's not even in this one. Here's a justified one. Mostly we see justified these days in like newspapers, right? Oh my god, why are they so small? It was bigger in the preview. We're just gonna look at it over here. Justified we mostly see these days in like newspapers or things where we're trying to fit in like exact columns, right? But it's really difficult to read. You can probably see the difference here because we get these big gaps between individual words where they're trying to make it fit exactly into the line. That's difficult. It also creates a lot of like rivers, right? Which is what happens. We talked about rivers a little bit in an early typography episode. Rivers are what happens when you have gaps that align throughout text blocks, and they can be really distracting. This is a really good example of one here. I had for a minute some like software that would let me draw on the screen. I don't know what happened to it. I downloaded it like once to make a point and then I never opened it again. So I have no idea where it is. You get a little tour of my applications here. I don't know. It's gone forever now. Oops, I'm not gonna draw on a screen. I'll just give up. So this is a good example of a river right here where you can see this break. So, until I click on it. You can see this break here that creates like a shape of its own in the gap. That is not what you want. So just say no when it comes to justified text. I see we've got some new folks that have joined the stream. Hello and welcome. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're having a lovely Monday. Welcome to Dev by Design. Today we are talking about common typesetting mistakes and how you can avoid them. We've already talked a little bit about using too many typefaces and how that can be distracting, not underlining things unless they're a link, adding a little more leading than you think you need, and we've just been talking about text alignment. As always, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. It's really boring when it's just me talking out into the world for like 45 minutes. So say hi, come hang out with us. Throw something in the chat. It's good to see you. Jumping back in on the same kind of note, when we're talking about alignment, we also have to keep in mind the width of the text block, right? So we're talking with alignment about how our eyes always have to come back to this beginning point here. And the reason that we want that, solid line of alignment on one side is so our eyes know where to come back to every time. When we have text that's like really long, right? Like this one's a little bit longer. I'm trying to find something that was like egregiously long. We have a hard time bringing our eyes all the way back because our eyes have further to travel, right? From when it's here and we just get to do like boop, 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 versus when we have to come all the way out to here and then we're like, oh God, where was that starting point? Every time, again, it increases that mental load, makes things a little bit more difficult to do. We have data now that tells us the human eye can most easily read text that is between 60 to 100 characters in length, and that includes the spaces in between your words, right? When you get shorter than 60 characters, it gets distracting in a different way where there's too many line breaks, and so we don't actually get to process a whole sentence. It feels like a break all the time. We're having to right in the middle every 5 words or something. So that can be distracting in its own way, but much longer than 100 characters, and we start to lose our place when our eyes try to find the next line because we have to travel too far to get all the way back to the beginning of the text block. So you'll note that if you go to any kind of a news site or a blog site, let's do Washington Post. That was the first newspaper that I thought of. So that's what you get. But you'll notice on websites like this, right, there's always a lot of white space on either side. Oh, New Prime Minister. Hadn't read that yet. Oh god, I don't want to. No. I don't want to pay for anything. I just want like an example article. Can I read any of these? Oh, okay. There we go. This will do. So, ignoring the 20 million pop-ups that are now part of navigating the web, you'll see that no matter how big I make my screen, the width of this text block does not change, right? So it doesn't stretch with us no matter how big this gets. And right, so even when I zoom like way out, this has a max width set on it somewhere to prevent it from stretching way out and making it hard to read. Because this width, right, this is the correct amount of kind of like characters and length that they've determined. They don't want to go past this. So you'll see in a lot of these white space on kind of either side. So here we are back at 100%. You'll end up with this kind of white space on either side. More and more they're putting ads in there, you know, because money. But even when there's not, right, like this is never going to stretch out because it's going to become too difficult to read. I really suggest, from a CSS perspective, making use of the clamp function here. All right, so when you use clamp in CSS, you can ensure that when your page resizes, your text blocks will always kind of stay in that most ideal, easily readable width. And you can do that. You can do that based on some like characters now. So there's you can totally set this. It is not like difficult, and it really will make a huge positive impact on how easy it is to read your content. Oh, clamp is a new one. Well then, please let me show you. I love CSS. Clamp is cool, right? So clamp kind of sets a middle range of values, right? So in the same way that we used to kind of like use media queries to determine like, you know, less than this or more than this, and we'd have to set different media queries. Clamp kind of lets you set a default, a minimum value, and a maximum value that will allow things to vary within that like range that you've set as safe, right? So in this example, oops, I clicked, oh my god, I'm clicking all over the place today. I'm trying to see if I could get this to resize smaller. Come on. There it goes. Great, so we can see that in the demo here, the font size is resizing as we go here, right? And all of that's set in that like one line of CSS, but it's never going to get less than 1 rem, and it's never going to get more than 2 rems with the 2.5 vertical width set as the default. So it's a really good way to kind of make things really adaptive, right? And you can do the same thing, right? This one's done with font size, but you could totally do the same thing with the width of your container if you were looking to do text block stuff, right? So you could say, you know, you could say like, you know, width, and you could put like, I don't know, 100%, you know, or something in the middle, so that it always defaults to take up as much of the available space, and then say like, but I never want it smaller than, I don't know, 200 pixels, and I never want it bigger than 500 pixels, you know, so that it would always be within that kind of range. And that kind of like fluid design and fluid typography is going to be really, really effective. Modern CSS has gotten incredibly cool. That's a whole nother, there's a whole talk, I think, rant I have on that like CSS has come really, really, really far. And it's like, yeah, it's fantastic. There's so much you can do now in CSS in just a line or two that we used to have to like set all kinds of media queries and mess for, right? Like this would have been a nightmare to do before, and now it's so easy. You can do it in a single line. And we've got lots of good functions like this function, and there's some like math related functions and some min and max functions that make setting these kind of adaptive ranges really, really easy. And yes, yep, helpful for people like me with giant screens. Right, because we're increasingly in the situation where like desktop setups are getting bigger, right? Like standalone monitors are getting bigger, but simultaneously everyone is reading everything on their phone. So you have to have a design that will work okay on something that is, this wide, and also something that is, here's my mark, this wide. And being able to kind of set these adaptive ranges is going to be really important, because we have the data that will say, right, we know how much, we know the width, we know how much the human eye can process before it gets difficult. So we can use that data in our designs to make choices that were easier to read, like objectively. So much of design is subjective, right? But there are it gets a bad rap because you feel like some people look at art and they like it, and some people look at art and they don't. That's okay. Art can be subjective, but design, so much of it is objective. We have the data. We know how the eye works. We know how the brain works. We know objectively the choices we can make to make things easier or harder to read. So, there's my rant. I'm gonna have a little coffee. Maybe I need less coffee. But yes, huge fan of the clamp functions, huge fan of some of these new adaptive CSS stuff that's coming out. Definitely give it a peek. Let me see if I can find somewhere. I have a presentation on modern CSS for responsive techniques. And basically how you can start to filter out those media queries. You don't need them anymore. I'll find it eventually, put it on Twitter. But hopping back over to type and easy typography mistakes. The next one we gotta talk about is color contrast, right? So we talked about it when we talked about color. And again, like I said before, it can be hard to disambiguate what makes good type from good design, because it's all one. So even though we're talking about color, we're still talking about type, because they're intrinsically linked. Anything that you set is going to be set in a color. So we got to talk about color. But poor color contrast is going to be probably the number one easiest way to make your text unreadable, right? So it does not ultimately matter what beautiful typeface you've chosen. It doesn't matter how well you've set it. It doesn't matter. All of that doesn't matter if you can't see it against the background color. You have absolutely got to get in the habit of running your colors through color contrast checkers, right? And if you have not seen one before, right, it's incredibly easy. I'm just Googling color contrast checker. I'm gonna get about 28 of them. This one, the one that is purple, happens to be my favorite, is the Adobe Color Contrast Analyzer, because it also includes some ways to mimic different sightedness, right? So you can see, where does it have it? There's a way that it shows, it mimics different forms of color blindness. Somewhere. There it is. Somewhere. Yeah, here we go. I'm gonna get there. I like this one a lot because it shows, right, so you can see if you had retinopia, or we know there's just red, green colorblind, blue, yellow colorblind, right? So we can check this and it'll tell you my theme is not colorblind safe, right? Whatever it was right here. It was down here in this pull down. I got there the long way. But anyway, you want a color contrast ratio that's going to be easily readable. If you're not familiar with these, the WCAG has defined different color contrast ratios. So you can either be failing, right, or you can have AA acceptance or AAA acceptance. You can see in this one, it's set to check for AA acceptance. If I were to switch this to AAA acceptance, you can see it no longer passes, right? This is no longer high enough contrast. The other thing that I like about this color contrast checker is that it will make suggestions for you of colors that are close, right? So you can see okay, if I swap it to this, we can see it gets better. It's still failing on a AAA, so I need something even higher. There we go, right? And because it's made these intelligent suggestions, we're still able to figure out something that worked with the general color scheme that we had. but which passes the color contrast ratio requirements as set by the WCAG. Question in here, why not just use RGB 255? I am unsure what you mean. You mean just like RGB as opposed to hex colors, or is RGB 255 a website or contrast checker that I'm not aware of? Give me a little more detail and I will answer that for you. But it's important to make sure that whatever you're doing, you have at least AA color contrast acceptability as per the WCAG, right? And this is one of those things, obviously this is important from an accessibility standpoint, don't mean to diminish that, but this is also one of those accessibility things that is going to impact literally everyone, every single one of your user, regardless of whether they have perfect 20/20 vision or not. Because when you factor in all of these things that impact how we see a screen, right? When you think about like the screen brightness, when you think about whether there's overhead light, right? Are they looking at their phone outside on a sunny day? Are they looking at it under fluorescence in their office? Whatever. How have they got their monitor calibrated? How good is their monitor? Is it a cheap monitor? Is it a really nice, like, you know, super high-end monitor? Do they have night shift on? You know, are they looking at your page at 11 o'clock at night and they've got flux or night shift enabled that's going to shift the way that your colors look? All that kind of stuff is going to mess with your design decisions, and all of those things are entirely out of your control. Like, there's just straight up nothing you can do about how a user has their monitor calibrated, or whether a user has night shift on, or 20 million other things. What you can do is make sure that your color contrast ratios are good enough that they can accommodate that kind of adjustment. So you can see, I'm pretty sure I actually have flux on right now, because I keep flux on all the time because I stare at a screen all day. So pretty much any time I'm looking at something, it's actually not, unless I'm making design decisions, it's not going to be screen accurate, right? So like, I'm hoping, I can't tell if you guys can see when I shift this. Yeah, I probably. Let me know if you can, right? But like, this is impacting the color contrast, absolutely, because it's changing the colors. This feels unbearable to me to have flux all the way off and be staring at like strong blue light all day. I will have a migraine instantly. So you can see, even though it's the middle of the day, I have flux on and I have it set to the highest setting because that makes my job tolerable. So whoever's designing things that show up on my screen, I feel a little bad for them. It's going to be different. And the more, the greater the contrast you can create, the more you can accommodate these kinds of user things that people are going to do no matter what. Okay, so you do just mean red, green, blue, 55, the actual values. You can. There's really no difference. This just happens to be using the hex codes to check it, this particular color accessibility checker. I'm sure that there are others that will use the RGB values. Right. So this one, I believe, does, yeah, so. Yeah, so this one will let you put it in. Oh no, that one is just hex. There's gotta be one out there that will let you put in the RGB color contrast stuff, I'm sure. But, I mean, honestly, like, it's no difference, right? It's all gonna be 6 of one done, 6 of one, half dozen of another. I got there, that was a struggle. So that's what, yeah, it all means the same. You could use that, you could use whatever lab colors, you could use HSL, it's all colors at the end of the day. What contrast ratio are you aiming to get for WCAG minimum grading? That's a great question, right? So the WCAG has set contrast ratios specifically. Oh, here we go. 7.1 for normal text, 4.5:1 for larger text for the AAA. AA requires 4.5:1 normal, 3:1 for large text. So they have defined it. This is what they have gone through. They've done the science and the testing. This is what they have decided is the ratio that's needed. Most color contrast checkers will just tell you like a pass or fail. So you don't have to actually memorize those numbers. All of that's going to be kind of baked into whatever color contrast checker you are using. So, right, we can see it flip to fail here. And we'll see some of them start to pass as we go through, right? Larger text is always going to be a little bit easier. And we see this starts to hit that WCAG pass before the AAA does. And the more we kind of shift to this, we'll see them pass individually. Right. Yeah. Contrast, good question. That contrast related, is contrast related to the WCAG? I thought it was comparative colors. Yes, is the answer. Yes to all of it. When we're talking about color contrast ratios, we are talking about comparing two colors. Most specifically, we're talking really about comparing the value, the like lightness or darkness of two colors. So in essence, you are correct. How is this related to the WCAG? Because the WCAG is setting accessibility guidelines, and when you have a color contrast ratio that is very low, it becomes very difficult to read, and that is especially challenging for people with vision difficulties, right? So if you don't have full vision, right, or are colorblind, or have blurred vision, or any number of kind of things there, so that's kind of what we're looking at. What that has to do with the WCAG, why WCAG cares about color comparisons. So let me know. Cool, I'm glad. Awesome. Holly, if there's any other questions, of course, or anything I can clear up. But yeah, as part of setting your type, you got to consider the color, because again, no matter how gorgeous the type itself is, if you can't read it against the background, it don't matter. Another thing to kind of be aware of in this same space is text over images. And that's something that I see a lot, right? I think it's starting to fade now, but there was definitely a design trend for a while where you would like open up a page and you get that big header image, right? That took up like the top third of the page, and inevitably there was text set over it. It's not that you can't do this, you just have to be careful about how you do it, right? If you have an image that has a lot of like varying values in it, if you have an image that has some really bright spots and some really dark spots, it's going to be a challenge, frankly, to set text over it in a way that is manageable. You can improve this in some ways. You could throw like a heavy drop shadow behind your text to try and kind of get that color contrast ratio happening with a single color kind of behind your text. You can try to blur the image, which kind of helps you achieve more of like a single value, at least a more similar value behind your text for you to set a contrast off of. But mostly it's just going to be making things kind of hard for you. So again, not to say that you can't put your text over images, but be aware and know that if you're running into issues, maybe look at a blur, look at a drop shadow, look at an outer glow, look at something that's going to help you differentiate the values, the colors of your text from the content that's behind it. Next, I want to talk a little bit about not matching the content, like the message of the content, to the typeface itself, right? I think these are probably some of the most like infamous type woes. These are the ones that get like pictures taken and uploaded to the internet where people like roast them on TikTok. There's a video going around because of course I'm on design TikTok, God help me, where somebody was just mocking the heck out of this girl who had made her own wedding menus, and she had set them in papyrus. And everyone was like, oh, how could you, like, blah, blah, blah. For those of you that don't have typefaces memorized like I do, we're talking about papyrus. We're talking about, no, we're not talking about this. Font. We're talking about this guy, right? which is kind of one of those infamous, like, quote unquote bad fonts out there, right? And the girl in the original video could not figure out why everyone hated it, right? But a lot of times when you see this kind of thing, you're dealing with a mismatch in the content and the typeface, the way that what the content is trying to communicate and the way that the typeface looks. So you see this, right, when there's like important work announcements that get set in Comic Sans, restaurant or wedding menu set in Papyrus, like event place cards that get set in Curls MT, And it's not that any of these fonts themselves are inherently bad. In fact, many of them are well designed. Papyrus is fine. It's not great. I will, however, absolutely go to bat for Comic Sans, which is like, that's my that's my hot take. That's my unpopular opinion. Is that Comic Sans is a fine font. It's a well-designed font, and we just keep using it for things that are not comics, and that is not Comic Sans' fault. Somebody got me into this rant, like I think it was either last week or the week before, when I was like, justice for Comic Sans. I feel that way, absolutely. But we're not using fonts for the purpose that they're designed for. We're gonna feel that like disconnect, and it's gonna feel ridiculous, right? Which is why Comic Sans has become such a laughing stock. For those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, I'm talking about Comic Sans here, this guy. But it gets used a lot, right? Like it's a jokey, funny little font that was designed literally to be used in like comics and like children's things. But when you see like a funeral program or like a very important, like someone has resigned this position kind of work announcement that's set in Comic Sans, you're just like, what? It feels ridiculous. Yeah, like Papyrus was for Mac. I don't think I actually knew that Papyrus was originally part of the Mac default fonts. Interesting. A little tidbit of knowledge for everyone today. So yeah, when you are choosing a typeface, it's super important to evaluate not just how it looks, but also how it feels, as well as whether there are any kind of popular associations with it now, right? So like, again, Comic Sans has achieved such an infamous status, it's going to be really hard to use it, even in places where it would normally fit well, because it's become such an internet joke, right? The other one that I see a lot is Impact, which for those of you that don't know, Impact is the font that was used for memes. The like ICANN has memes, right? So this guy, right? And when you see Impact especially used in all caps, it's gonna look like a meme. Like no matter where or how you set it, right? Because it's been used in this way forever now. So you gotta be aware of kind of not just the font and how the font looks, but the kind of contextual understanding, the connotation, right, of what these fonts are based on how they've been used and whether they come with any kind of cultural baggage, right? Impact is what you use to send your boss when you quit. Yeah. See, I'm a big fan of the write out a resignation message on a sheet cake and deliver that. I saw somebody do that on the internet once. I thought that was a fantastic idea. I don't plan on quitting anytime soon, but when I do, it's going to be a sheet cake. Anyway. So when we're looking at typefaces, right, like setting aside the ones that are super popular or maybe infamous, things to look for: lots of decorative swooshes, lots of kind of elements, decorative elements, lots of like texture or pattern in the font itself. Basically anything that's going to be really eye-catching and really distracting. You want to really carefully assess those kinds of fonts before you use them in a project. If they're too distracting, then they're gonna overwhelm or conflict with whatever message you're actually trying to communicate. And when we're talking about design, the message is always king. When in doubt, it's okay to just opt for a more standard less flashy font, and it might not feel as exciting. It might not feel like a big aesthetic design choice. But not everything has to be a big trend-setting design choice. Some projects are not meant to have design as the forefront, honestly. There's a saying that good design is invisible, right? Meaning that when we've designed something really well, we don't have to think about the design. The design itself is not what stands out. The content, the message, the experience, like whatever we're trying to do, that's going to be the thing that comes first. And that's usually a good thing, right? Especially if that message or content is something that's highly emotional, something that's really important, something that's, when we're talking about like wayfinding signs, when we're talking about like warnings or important work announcements, or again, like obituaries, funeral programs, all those things where we're communicating information that is sensitive or important, it's okay to let the design and let the type take a back seat, right? In those cases, it's hard to go wrong with the classics, and it's okay, right, to choose a Helvetica or a Garamond or a Calibri. Those are, the kind of Times New Roman. The fonts that are kind of defaults, they're okay to use when the message is something that needs to be, when it's crucial that the message is seen first. Like, I think that may itself be a hot take, is that like not everything has to be a big design moment. Sometimes the content is what matters, right? And it's okay to make minimal design choices to just support the legibility and the understanding of that content, rather than making a design choice or making a design trend, So, yeah. Yeah, when my granddad died, I let everyone know in comics fans. Exactly. Finally, the last kind of typesetting mistake that I want to talk about is not creating a hierarchy, a visual hierarchy. And another way that beginning designers will often kind of struggle is by ignoring this concept of the hierarchy and setting all of their type in the same weight and the same size. And for those of you that have not been here every Monday morning to watch Dev by Design, we talked a little bit about visual hierarchy at this point a while ago when we were talking about layout. So just to give a really brief refresher, when we're talking about visual hierarchy, we're talking about the order in which a viewer's eye will move through a design based on how you've drawn their eye to each element using size, color, and placement. So basically, large, high contrast items that are placed higher on the page are going to draw the eye much faster than like a lower contrast, smaller item that's placed further down. A really good example of this is newspapers. Here we go, add to stream. All right, so you can see here, when we're talking about visual hierarchy, this is like one of the first things that we see, right? The New York Times and the Men Walk on the Moon, because it's so big and it's right at the top and it's in a heavier, darker font than everything else. And we start there and our eyes kind of work down, right, in order of size. We see this next, right, the astronauts land, and then we get some subheaders here that will kind of read like third, and then we make our way down to the body copy. And that's done intentionally. It's guiding our eye through this in order of importance, and it's doing that by using like the weight, the darkness of the font, the width of the font, heaviness maybe, by using the size, by using the placement to kind of tell us what's important, where we should start, where we should go next. Type is, as you can see in this example, a really huge part of how we create a hierarchy, because that's really what we're conditioned to like skim through. So when we like open a new document, our eyes are going to scan in a Z pattern. We'll go down and then across again. So skim here across the top, we do a diagonal cut, and then we go along the bottom, which, by the way, when you open a website and you see like, there's a header, the logo is right over here, and then you get like a nav bar, and then when you skim across, there's usually a big like eye-catching like an image or text right there in the middle, and then you do the bottom and there's a footer. That's why, because we know how the eye breaks down a page, right? And it will follow that pattern unless we intentionally and visually disrupt it with other elements to grab your attention. So it's really important when we are setting titles, headings, all that kind of stuff, that they look visually different to the body copy. We can do that again by setting them in a different color. We can set them in a different font. We could make them way bigger. We can make them bolder. We could make them way lighter. It almost doesn't matter how we make them stand out as long as we do, because that's what signifies to a viewer that there's going to be different content here, right? That this is important and this is different and we need to look at this. Without any hierarchy at all, a page is going to feel really cluttered because our eyes just don't know where to start. We kind of look at it and it just like overwhelms us. We just look at it and we're like, yikes, you know? It's hard to sort out where we're supposed to begin, where we go next. We really want a design to guide us through the viewing of the page. It feels overwhelming to look at a large amount of text that's not broken into smaller blocks, you know? You ever like look at an article and it's just like, all this text, and it's like, oh my god, break this into chunks for me, right? We want those headers, subheaders, pull quotes. We want things to kind of break the content into digestible chunks that allows us to kind of skim, right? That's for better or worse how most of us take in information. All of that kind of stuff, all of those things we can do with type alone. So it's really, really important to pay attention when we are setting our type and making sure that we are creating this kind of hierarchy and we are guiding the viewer through the design. All right, I feel like I just kind of ranted for an hour, and probably I did. But yeah, that was it. That's what I got for you today, my friends. Those are some type mistakes and how to avoid them. So holler in the chat if you have any questions, if there's anything that I didn't talk about. Hopefully you learned a little something. And I appreciate you hanging out with me on this fun Monday morning. If there's nothing of urgency, I think I'm gonna wrap it up for today. I think we're gonna wrap here. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you all later.